Hello, my name is Talisha Woodson, and I'm a monitoring consultant with the Infant and Toddler Connection of Virginia.
And I'm Sarah Moore. I'm also a monitoring consultant with the Infant and Toddler Connection of Virginia.
Today we're going to be doing a web tutorial for you entitled How to Complete Your Mid-Year and End-of-Year Fiscal Form. Hopefully everyone has had an opportunity to see the initial how to complete your initial fiscal form. That web tutorial is archived on the EIPD website. If you go to the EIPD website, that can be found under EI Topics and Training, Local System Oversight and Management, and Archived Webinars and Web Tutorials. Today we're going to focus just on the mid-year and end-of-year fiscal form. And so I'm going to go through the actual fiscal form itself, and Sarah will go through the therapy provider tabulations, and so we're going to kind of bounce back and forth between the two based on how local systems would complete those. So as you can see from your screen here, this is the initial budget, which, as I mentioned, is already archived on the EIPD website. So again, today we're going to talk about the mid-year budget. Now, it's important to know that the Infant Toddler Connection of this information is already going to be pre-populated for you on this form based on how it was completed in your initial budget. So you do not need to complete these tabs again. You do, however, need to type in the date here under date costs incurred from. And we're going to start that at the beginning of the fiscal year, which is July the 1st, 2016, or whatever fiscal year you are reporting from. And that's going to go all the way till December 31st of that same fiscal year. So we're currently in fiscal year 17, so this report is going to look at July 1st, 2016 to December 31st, 2016. All right, so let's start just talking about our direct service unit. All right, so here, you guys remember in the initial budget, we already allocated for each individual revenue stream, just kind of how we felt like services were going to be utilized within the local system for this fiscal year. So this information is already going to be pre-populated from your initial budget. So your annual federal Part C revenues, annual state Part C revenues, as well as your additional revenues are going to pull from your initial budget. And that is going to be true for your direct service units, your direct services individual activities, as well as systems ops and your revenues by source. Total revenues, this column is going to be pre-calculated, pulling from these three columns here, and the spreadsheet will automatically total the total revenues here. So what do? So what actually needs to be completed on this mid-year form? Well, right here in column F, we're going to focus on mid-year data, which is expenditures. And what we want to put in these categories is exactly how much was expended by the local system from July 1st to December 31st. Now, I know there's still bills coming in and probably something that's sitting on somebody's desk right now. However, we just want to go based on what has been received that has already been paid out by the local system. So whatever has been paid out by the local system is what will be captured on this mid-year report. So assessment for service planning, you can see we put actual numbers here to kind of help you guys visually with following us. So assessment from service planning, we planned $35,383 for the year. So far, from July to December, we've spent $19,857 of that amount. That's what we're going to put here under expenditures. And the same is true for each category underneath direct services here. If you have a column, like you can see here besides occupational therapy AP services, where we budgeted $250, but we didn't spend anything so far. So far we haven't spent that money, and that's okay. We would just put a 0 there. And what will happen is when you type in that 0, it'll automatically give you this little hyphen. So that's not an error. That's something the spreadsheet does to let it know that that's a 0 there. So you're going to, again, go ahead on and enter in your amounts that are appropriate for each of these direct service areas based on what the local system has actually expended already out, meaning paid out already to whether that's the contract providers for services or that has been paid out for service providers that you have on staff related to these service areas. And then you'll see here in the gray that subtotal for direct service will calculate for you through the spreadsheet. Under direct services individual activities, which is going to be found right underneath that, I'm sorry, went a little too far past it. In this category here, where accessible technology devices, audiology eligibility, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to report based on what the local system has expended in these areas for that 7/1 to that 12/31 time frame. And once again, here you can see nutrition, we budgeted $500, but we haven't spent anything in that, so we're just going to put 0 here. If you have a column that you didn't budget anything for, but you did spend something, then you're going to also put that amount here as well. There is we do allow some variation within categories in terms of moving funds around and details around specifics of how much you can move around without necessarily having to do resubmit your budget to the state office is included in the instructions. And if you have questions about that specifically, you can contact your TA monitoring team. Under systems operations, once again, you're going to pretty much do the same thing. You're going to note how much was actually expended in each of these areas. So as you can see, training, we haven't spent anything so far. Public awareness, we haven't spent anything so far, and that's fine. Remember, we're only midway through. We still have the rest of the fiscal year to go. And so it's not necessarily a red flag if you have areas that you haven't expended funds for within at the mid-year point. What is a red flag, however, is if your expended amounts are exactly half of what your budgeted amount is. Typically, that doesn't quite work that way. You know, we budget for things like going to the movies, and we get there and we find out that we have a coupon and it's a little less, or we find out that the movies is a little bit more, or we decide that we want to do something different, or maybe it's an IMAX movie or 3D or something, and so it can potentially fluctuate a little bit. So because of that fluctuation, typically 99% of the time, your expended amounts at mid-year are not going to be exactly half of your direct service amounts or your systems operation amounts. So just keep that in mind as you're moving forward. Again, gray areas are going to subtotal what each area is, and then those 3 subtotal areas are going to be totaled under total revenues and expenditures. As we go down to revenue by source, we see how much the annual budget was. This is what was pulled over from their initial budget. So the money that we anticipated that the local system was going to receive in. That's what's in this gray column. What's in this first white column, actual revenues mid-year, is basically, okay, so this is how much you said that you thought you'd get in. How much did you actually get in? And so mid-year, we want to report on exactly how much that local system has received. So for your federal Part C funds and your state Part C funds, those are going to be your warrants that you receive. So how many warrants have you received from July 1st to December 31st? You're going to total those, and that would be that number that you put right here for federal Part C funds, and the same is true for state. And then if you have return earnings, you definitely want to put those there as well. Same is true for local funds, Medicaid, Medicaid TCM, insurance, Tricare, your family cost share, family fees, donations, in-kind, as well as anything else that's listed here. So we're going to put in what money do we actually, somebody told me they were going to give me this money. How much have they actually given you as of that 7/1 to 12/31 period? Then under amount expended mid-year, this is how much did you spend. So this is what they told us they were going to give us. This is what they actually have given us so far. And of that amount, this is what we spent so far. So under amount expended, we're going to focus on how much we have actually spent of what we've received. And so if you spent it, you definitely want to put that it's been spent. If you didn't spend it, though, it's okay because we're only halfway into the year, right? We still have the rest of the year to go. And so we know that there are going to still be bills coming in that have to be paid, and so don't fret if you're noticing that you have something over here in this little balance column there. It has no indication of what things are going to pan out to necessarily be by the end of the year. So you can see here, local funds, we anticipated that we were going to get in $55,000 for the year. So far, we've gotten in $27,500, but we've only spent $25,000 of that. So that's where that balance number comes in. Again, you want to go ahead on and fill out the rest of these categories in terms of how much is expended. The amount that was expended should match your total revenues and expenditures up here in that top section A. So what you actually spent. So once you go through and you put in your direct services by individual activity, your systems operation, once you put in exactly how much you spent in those areas, that should match this. Okay? Just the breakdown is a little bit different. This kind of does it by service. This does it by where did you get the money from. But the total should be the same. And then what you received minus what you spent is this number here in the surplus. And that number should match any balances that are listed over here in this column. All right, we're going to move to therapy provider mid-year report with Sarah. Okay.
When you receive your initial fiscal forms at the beginning of the year from the State Part C office, I would recommend at that point you go ahead and send every contract provider that works with your system a copy of the therapy provider mid-year report. Each contract provider will need to submit that to you, your system, and then your system will compile that to submit one therapy provider mid-year report to the state. I would also recommend that your system ask the contract providers to submit their individual reports at least a week before the mid-year expenditure reports are due to allow your system enough time to compile the report. You begin by putting the reporting period dates in. For your mid-year report, just as Talisha said for the system reports, you're going to enter the dates of 7/1 through 12/31 of the current fiscal year. Now your next step is to move to Section 1, Service Units. Each therapy report is contractor therapy report is going to include the number of 15-minute units that contractor, provider, or contract agency provided for the first half of the fiscal year. Then you will take all of those totals for PT, OT, speech, developmental services, nursing, and others, total those, specify what the other is referring to, and complete the blanks on Section 1. Section 2 is service coordination expense. Any contract provider that provides service coordination will record the cost of providing service coordination in Section 2. And again, you will compile that total for your one submitted therapy provider mid-year report. Now, Section 3 requires you first to determine where contract provider revenue is captured for your system. If you submitted an initial budget and you included contract provider revenue from Medicaid and private insurance, and family fees, if you included that in your system budget, then you would put zeros down here in Section 3, because that revenue was not collected by the contract provider, it was collected by your agency. If your system bills for a contract provider and keeps the revenue they receive from Medicaid, private insurance, and family fees, then you would put 0 in these columns. However, if the contractor does their own billing and the contractor receives the revenue, then that revenue is recorded here. And you should advise your contract providers, just as Talisha said for your mid-year report, that this should be actual revenues received, not pending insurance reimbursements, but actual revenues received at the mid-year point. So you receive all the individual contract provider therapy reports. Then you compile all of those into one report to be submitted. You total the 15-minute units of service units in Section 1. You total the service coordination costs in Section 2. And you total the revenue for contract provider agencies that keep that revenue in Section 3.
Thank you, Sarah. We're going to transition now to the end of the year report, and we're doing these two reports together because they are very similar. And so rather than do 3 different tutorials, we definitely felt like we were able to capture this along with the mid-year, just to kind of tie it in because they are so similar in nature. So once again, just like we talked about in the mid-year report, the infantile connection of this name is going to be pre-populated for you along with the DUNS number. You will need to type in the dates the costs are incurred from. And so since this is the end of the year, we're going to want to do that 7/1 date to the 6/30 date. And then, of course, your year is going to depend on what fiscal year you're reporting on. And so for this fiscal year's purposes, we have 7/1/2016 to 6/30/2017. So as we mentioned with the mid-year report, sorry, went down too far too quickly, that the annual federal Part C revenues, state Part C revenues, additional revenues, all of that information is pulled for you from that initial budget form because those numbers haven't changed too much. So that information is going to be pulled for you. It will total it in the total revenues column. So what we're focusing on keying in for this end of the year is going to be your end of the year expenditures. Now, it is important that you know that the mid-year spreadsheet does not combine with this end of the year spreadsheet. So what I mean is that this is not the second half of the year. So we're not pulling from mid-year and just filling in for the second half of the year. What's reported in your end of the year should reflect what has been expended for the entire year. So this number here for assessment for service planning and the expenditures column refers to how much the local system has spent on assessment for service planning for the entire fiscal year. And the same is true for each category. So we have occupational therapy here. We have OT, AT service, which we didn't spend anything. And then we go down to PT, PTAT, developmental services, speech, and so on and so forth, where that information is captured. But again, just remember that this is for the entire fiscal year. We have a couple of spreadsheets that are included in here that will calculate together, and we will explain to you and let you know when we get to those tabs. But here you need to report true numbers for the entire year. Under direct services, individual activities, again, just like mid-year, you're going to report, again, how much was expended in the entire year for these areas here, okay? Under systems operations, again, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to report what was expended in administration, systems management, data collection, training, public awareness, and other systems costs. And that will be reported here in these white areas. And then, of course, as always, the spreadsheet is going to subtotal each category and then combine those subtotals to come up with a total revenue and expenditures for each column that is listed here. Under Section B, revenue by source, let's scroll down and make sure everybody can see before I start talking. All right. So under revenue by source, once again, we have our annual budget. So going back to the initial budget, this is what we said, okay, well, the federal Part C money we're going to get for our program and the state Part C money is going to be this. This is what we got was listed on our contract that we're going to get for federal funds, for state funds. This is what we had carried over from the federal funds as well as the state funds. And this is how much we anticipate we're going to get in local funds, Medicaid, EITCM insurance, Tricare, so on and so forth. So what we're going to report again is just like we did mid-year, but again looking at the entire year, is how much did we actually spend for the entire year. So we spent all of that, actually I'm sorry, how much we brought in for the entire year. So this is what we anticipated, and the actual revenues is what we actually got. So this is what you told me you were going to give me. This is what I actually got. And so here, numbers match up based on the warrants that were received, carryover funds, and then here local funds, what was said, what was actually received, all the way down to in kind. Under amount expended, this is where we're going to focus on what was actually spent for the entire year. And let me go back to this federal retained and state return earnings, because we know that we have time frames that that money has to be spent. But again, we're looking at the entire year. And so even though we know that that money has to be expended prior to that mid-year date, we're reporting on the whole year. So if we are looking at the entire year, we received that $5,600 was received within the entire year. And under expended, we spent it. Somewhere within that year, we spent that money, so that would be reported here. So actual amounts that the local system spent in each revenue source area is what would be captured under amounts expended for the year end. And if the numbers don't match up, like we're looking at state Part C funds here, and we see that the budget was $132,573, but the amount expended was only $130,659, and that's completely okay. The spreadsheet will go ahead on and calculate that balance over to the side for you to let you know, hey, you guys have an excess here, an excess of funds here, and that's fine. We'll talk about that in a second. So you're just going to go ahead on it and put in the amount that was expended for each area for the year. Now, what's over in this balance column really is an overflow. So this 1914 means that that amount of state funds was not expended during the entire fiscal year, and that's fine because we can carry over those funds, right? So we would expect to see that on that local system initial budget for the following fiscal year. And this balance amount here should match the surplus that's right here in terms of actual revenues year end, where it says surplus down here in the gray. Also, the amount, actually it doesn't total it here. You can see that we had an anticipated deficit of $12,000 that this local system has managed to not even have. So the money that we received, we were able to spend. Everything was fine. We balanced out with everything with that. That money was not needed. And lastly, in the comments, you can notice here just from an overall view that Medicaid, we anticipate $6,000. We brought in close to $10,000. Why is that? That's okay that happens. Utilize that comment box to just give a brief summary of a comment about why there were differences in that number. So you can see here beside Medicaid and Medicaid TCM that there were some differences in the numbers that were actually received than we anticipated, and that was due to Medicaid enrollment increases. Also, we have over here for insurance, we had that to go down a little bit, and again, we have a note over here that insurance payments decreased the second half of the year. Actually, let me fix this. Okay. over here in Tricare, we have, oh goodness, we only budgeted for $37.80 for Tricare, but we see that that number is clearly more than $37.80. So we documented here Tricare reimbursement increase. We're doing a little bit better with family cost share, collecting family fees, almost doubled. Why is that? Some training was provided to support staff on how to complete the form. That is clearly showing to have some good rewards because we almost doubled what we anticipated. Same is true for donations. Got a little bit of extra money. Somebody was extra nice to us. And then in kind, we have some additional funds that were provided via in-kind because of an increase in utilities. So that's what we would expect to find on the end of your report here. Again, if you have questions about any of this, please don't hesitate to contact your TA and monitoring team. And back to Sarah.
Your therapy year-end report is completed just like your therapy mid-year report. Once again, you're going to want to send the spreadsheet well in advance to all of your contract providers, and you want to ask them to return the spreadsheet to your system at least 1 week before your year-end expenditure report is due to the state, so that you have enough time to review them and compile all the information. There's one major difference between a therapy provider year-end report and the system year-end report, and that's the reporting period. For the therapy provider year-end report, you are reporting on the second half of the fiscal year. So your first date you're going to type in is 1/1 of the current fiscal year, and then your end date is going to be June 30th. You only report on the second half of the fiscal year. And once again, you complete this exactly as you did the mid-year. You total the number of 15-minute units provided, you fill in information under Other, and you put the totals for all of your contract providers. You total all of the service coordination expenses for all of your contract providers providing service coordination and enter that in Section 2. And once again with Section 3, what you put here depends on who collects the revenue. If the revenue goes to your local system and is included in your local system budget, you put zeros here. If the revenue is collected by the contract provider and stays with the contract provider, then you put the actual amount they received in revenues for the second half of the year. And now we're going to move over to the therapy provider tabulation. For this report, you type in the start date, which would be the beginning of the fiscal year, and then you use the drop down to choose your end date. This report will automatically total the information in Section 1, 15-minute units, the information in Section 2, service coordination costs, and the information in Section 3, revenue, from the mid-year and year-end report. So the only thing you enter on this report would be your start date, and then use the drop-down for your end date. And it calculates the year-end totals for you. And now Felicia's going to tell us how that carries over to system tabulation.
Thank you, Sarah. So finally, here we are, systems tabulation. And once again, this information is going to be pre-populated for the infant-toddler connection of. The DUNS number is going to be pre-populated. Here you won't have to enter in the start date. That would automatically populate. And then you'll choose from the drop-down here to select your end date. The total expenditures here. Now this is going to pull in the total from your year-to-date for the local lead agency, which was that end-of-year report that I talked about a few moments ago, as well as the therapy provider tabulation, which Sarah just spoke about. So this total expenditures is the amount that your local system expended on services, and that includes the information that was shared from your therapy and contract providers. Again, you don't need to do anything on this page besides put in that end date. Everything else here is going to be pre-calculated for you. It's going to pull from those other spreadsheets that have already been completed. So you want to ensure that when you're working on your budget, that you're working off the same spreadsheet, because otherwise you're going to have to do a lot of back work and going back in and putting in those formal numbers so that it calculates this information appropriately. Sarah mentioned this a little while ago, but talking about how to report information on the therapy tab versus the actual fiscal form. And that's important because we don't want duplications here. If you report information in your actual fiscal form that is reported on your therapy tabulation, it's going to throw these numbers way out of sync, and it's not going to be an accurate reflection of what the expenses are for your local system. So ensure that that information is correct, and as always, if you have questions about how to complete any of these fiscal forms or need further clarification, please feel free to contact your TA and monitoring team. Thank you so much for your time today. We hope this has been helpful. Have a great evening.
And please don't hesitate to contact your monitoring consultant or TA if you have any further questions.